Good evening and welcome to the webinar in our monthly webinar series for parents. My name is Kathy Thompson and I am the founder of Beyond the Classroom. Since 1998, Beyond the Classroom has been a pioneer in the field of in-home tutoring, setting our standards high and helping students achieve great success with our certified teachers. We continue to set ourselves apart from other tutoring organizations because the student is at the center of our business model. We provide not only one-on-one academic support through tutoring, but we focus on the whole child and those aspects of their lives that affect learning. This is the reason why we host monthly webinar free events. This evening we'll find out more about the different learning styles and tips on how to work with these with your own children and students. Now I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce tonight's expert, Jill Campbell. Jill has been working with Beyond the Classroom since July 2015. In addition to her role as a tutor, she also holds the position of client relations and administrative support, which includes working directly with families and connecting them with Beyond the Classroom tutors, answering questions, social media, and writing for the Beyond the Classroom blog. Jill was a teacher in London, England for 7 years and has experience teaching secondary science, English, and psychology. Over the course of her UK career, she held 2 teaching and learning responsibilities, including Science Key Stage 3 Coordinator and Gifted and Talented Coordinator for the whole school. After returning to Canada in 2010, she joined the Boston Consulting Group, a global management consulting firm, and headed up MBA and PhD recruiting. In her spare time, Jill enjoys reading, traveling, and blogging with her blog, which we'll post later, her parenting and education lifestyle blog, which has been published in the Huffington Post 2 times. Jill currently lives in Southeast Burlington with her husband Ian and two daughters, Maeve and Isla. Thank you very much for attending tonight, and I'll turn things over to Jill.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for that introduction. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Jill Campbell, so welcome. It's great to have this opportunity. I was really flattered when Kathy asked me, and as she mentioned, I've been working as a tutor. I've been tutoring obviously a lot longer, probably for about the last 10 years of my life. Some of it very informally, but I've been doing it now for over a year with Beyond the Classroom. And it's great to to have this opportunity to share kind of my insight with you, because the goal of today or of tonight rather is just for me to show you and hopefully equip you with some practical knowledge on how you can figure out what type of learner either your child is or your client that you're working with, and some strategies that perhaps would help support them, whether it be at home or when you're working with them. And actually, most of this presentation has been actually taken from one of my blog articles, and it was called Student Learning Styles, One Size Doesn't Fit All. And I published that at the beginning of the year. And I've got a few of my original photography on here as well for you. So let's get rolling here to the first slide. So I wanted to talk briefly about the evolution of learning a little bit. So I actually did my teacher's college in the UK, right in London. It was at the Institute of Education at the University of London, which is one of the oldest teacher's colleges. And while I was there, especially in the kind of the beginning stages, they talked about this empty vessel model of student knowledge acquisition. And I was really intrigued by it because it's obviously changed a lot over the years, as we've looked at a student as a whole, rather than this idea that originally they were viewed as kind of an empty glass or vessel, and it was the job of teachers and tutors to fill them with knowledge. And a lot of this knowledge was delivered in scripted lectures and taking notes, which unfortunately is still the attitude, or still a lot of colleges and universities anyways, they still use that strategy. But we know that's not the case anymore, and that learning is actually viewed as a very complex process, influenced by a lot of different factors, including an individual's own cognitive, emotional, and environmental factors, as well as their prior experience and knowledge. Um, and the idea that every student learns differently has gained widespread recognition in education theory and classroom managed strategy a lot over the years. And the idea of individualized learning styles itself became really popular in the 1970s. They started out in the 1920s. There was a lot of research, and then in the 70s, it really boomed in the UK, Australia, and in New Zealand as well. And so, if we look at the research, there are a lot of studies that do show that if we accommodate a child's learning style and their own individual approach, we can at least, if not increase, but affect their performance at school in a positive way. And so let's take a look here at what are the learning styles, because the actual term itself was posed by a Harvard professor, Howard Gardner, and he actually described, learning styles as how an individual approaches a range of tasks, and he categorized them in different ways. They can either be visual, auditory, kinesthetic. They can be impulsive, right brain, left brain. I'm sure you've heard of that before. And Gardner actually called these learning styles a hypothesis of how an individual approaches a range of materials. So when we're looking at learning styles, we are in this way speaking to the understanding that everybody does learn differently, and that an individual's learning style refers to the preferential way in which the student or the individual absorbs, processes, comprehends, and retains this kind of information. So let's take a look now at an example, because we have talked now about how we go about retaining and gathering all of this information. And just before we look at an example, I wanted to briefly talk to you about the different models of learning styles. There's several popular ones. I'm going to be focusing on one tonight, but some of the models include Howard Gardner, who I already mentioned. He had a multiple intelligences model, and this looks at IQ and other factors. We have the VAQUE model, which I'm going to talk about briefly in a minute, and the Kolb learning style model, and then the Myers-Briggs personality model, which is actually a personality test, but it also looks at the different ways that people perceive and interpret information. So all really interesting. And there have been tons of meta-analysis studies where researchers have looked at all of the results of studies over the years, kind of taken a cross-sectional look at the relationship between the evidence and looking at performance. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, and how we need to kind of interpret that data. So let's take a look at an example. So as a teacher or a tutor, we're always giving our students or our clients activities to do, and the way that they are able to act out the instructions or to actually perform, it differs with each individual person. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, in school, as classroom sizes, as class sizes are getting bigger and resources are getting lower, we don't have the opportunity as much to allow a student to kind of choose their preferential way in which they want to execute the activity, so to speak. So this is just an example for, if we wanted students to learn how to build something, say in a science or engineering or a tech class, some students might actually understand the process by following verbal instructions that a teacher would read out loud. They might follow better or understand it better by actually experimenting hands-on with the parts themselves, or using visual guidance like a blueprint or a map, or a pictorial representation with instructions, or maybe just by watching somebody else demo it. And in the ideal world, we would have everybody be able to choose the way that works best for their learning style. So as I mentioned about all the different types of models, we're going to look at the VAQUE model. I was drawn to this one because it is a very general model, and it kind of simplifies the learning styles in these three key areas. It is general, but the main thing to realize here is that we never want to pigeonhole a student and say that, oh, well, you're just a visual learner, or oh, you're just an auditory learner, because that doesn't happen. And a lot of the times, we tend to have some students exhibit characteristics from, one, two, or maybe all three different categories. So the VAQUE model itself was developed by psychologists, like I had mentioned, in the early 20s, 1920s, in order to classify these most common ways that people learn. And according to the model, most of us prefer to learn in one of three ways, which is visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. And it's pretty straightforward as to what type of learner. Visual, obviously, prefer to have visual input. Auditory, like to hear the input. And then kinesthetic, just like to get their hands and bodies going and moving and doing different things. Okay, although in practice, like I said, we generally mix and match these three styles. We don't like to label students all the time. So a variation of this acronym was actually proposed by Neil Fleming. He's actually a teacher from New Zealand and a researcher who was really interested in learning styles, and he ended up modifying it slightly and adding another letter to the acronym and called it VARQ, which basically just added reading and writing as a different model. So what type of learner is your child? So this is something that parents can do by just simple observation at home. And then tutors, you can also do this by observation and actually speaking and communicating with your client and the parents. And I'm going to show you a website that I actually use with my first session with new clients on looking at some of their, preferred learning styles. Because we know lots of different, there's a lot of different styles, and we have to try to at least cater somewhat, cater to some of those learning styles. So let's take a look then at some signs that your child or your student might show, and some strategies that we can perhaps use with them. So for the first one, we're going to look at visual learners first. Visual learners, signs that they might be a visual learner. Let's take a look here. So they like solving puzzles and books, especially ones with pictures. So Where's Waldo, search and find books, things like those, where there's a lot of visual stimuli. They tend to be drawn to those. They also like artwork, vibrant displays, posters, mosaics, and they often demonstrate keen powers of observation and tend to not miss a trick. So when they're watching something, they tend to kind of take it all in. They also tend to be photographic memory people with photographic memories too, which is also interesting. And some strategies that we can use with visual learners. Well, again, it's difficult sometimes, obviously, when in school when we're limited on time and resources, but incorporating diagrams, charts, graphs, or pictures into their work. Sometimes a lot of students really struggle with writing down their ideas on paper when they have to write an answer, whether it's in paragraph form or in question form. So sometimes it's good to start with actually getting them to draw out or sketch out their ideas on paper if they want to do it in a pictorial way, because it's a lot easier that way to get them thinking and not have them feel constrained to that one mode. And then working on getting those ideas into Word format later. For test revision, they love, flashcards are great. Mind maps, brain maps as they're often called too, are a great way to kind of link ideas and topics in a certain concept at school. And that goes right through, I think, from, grade 3, grade 4, right up to grade 12. Using colored highlighters to kind of emphasize keywords, underlining things, highlighting them, helping those photographic memories in order to retain the information. Sometimes even using symbols is a good way to assist them in memorization of key things. So next we have auditory learners. So auditory learners tend to gravitate towards music, songs, instruments. They're often musical, and they can often learn a song by just hearing it once. And my sister is a person like this. She's a composer and a musician, and when she was very young and learning piano, she could hear an Elton John song and go on the piano and bash it out, even though she didn't actually know the keys and the letterings and all the notes. But they tend to really respond well to verbal instructions, and they can usually perform a task after only been, told the instructions once or twice. And some strategies that we can use with auditory learners include playing music in the background. There are actually a lot of students that find that distracting. So an auditory learner might like that. They might welcome it, or even having a white noise kind of in the background, which is a good way for them to kind of focus in on what they're doing. Allowing them to talk it out is important. Um, Even getting, this is the homework task, sitting down with your child and getting them, hey, just explain to me what do you think is the question that your teacher's asking here, and what, how can we talk about brainstorming it and talking it out. Using audio materials like audiobooks is also great. They like to hear perhaps stories rather than reading it. But a key thing for them is, using different sounds like anecdotes, putting things into almost jokes and songs or puns. YouTube is huge. There's so many resources on there. For example, for students that I have that tend to lean towards auditory learners, to being an auditory learner, I tend to, if we're learning a times table, YouTube has tons of songs to help them memorize certain times tables, even using popular music, and that's a great way. Podcasts are huge, and then even rhymes and raps to get them to memorize different things. And our last type of learner is the kinesthetic learner. So these are our movers and our shakers. They're the ones that while they're doing homework at the kitchen table, they're constantly squirming, can't sit in their seat, fiddling with equipment, and they best learn while doing hands-on activities. So they're given some materials and they can just get on with it themselves. They love field trips and they love being able to move around a classroom, which unfortunately isn't always something that they can do. So some strategies that you can use with kinesthetic learners include, keeping a healthy supply of art materials in your home, and bringing those out and allowing them to kind of creatively figure out a way to demonstrate a topic or some kind of knowledge. Mosaics and collages are a great way. Using beads or other objects, like even your fingers when you're learning how to count or do times tables. Kinesthetic learners love to do that. They tend to be the ones that can't keep their hands still. Role playing is also great. I've done it with high school students, even getting them to role play photosynthesis. Having different students, act out the different molecules in the process. And then using using materials for activities like Lego, making bar charts, is a great fun activity. And there's a lot of stuff on the web too, in addition to some of the things that I've listed here. These are kind of my things that I've pulled together over the years, but there's a lot of stuff, obviously on the web. And using sticky notes, that's another great way to brainstorm ideas, write down key definitions, and then giving them some space to kind of organize their ideas out on a table is a great way too. So we've looked at the VAQUE model, we've looked at the different types of learning styles, the 3 key ones there, and we've looked at some signs you can look for, and we've also looked at some strategies that you can use at home in order to help kind of foster, that learning style that they tend to gravitate towards. So what is the deal with all of this? The main thing here, the one caveat, is that it's important to be aware that there are limitations, obviously, to any type of research, and especially with the learning style models. No model is perfect. We do need further research. We do know that there are links. We're just not sure how strong they are, and we don't want to, like I said, pigeonhole students in any way. We need more research, and that's imperative. So any theory or model of learning styles is basically a simplification of the complexity of how students learn. It's a very complex process. They're at best, one of a range of factors that determine how learners react to learning opportunities, whether it be your environment having an effect, the teaching methods that are being used, the curriculum itself. They're all part of a complex kind of interaction, and we need more research. And that, investigating your child or your client's distinctive learning style is really just scratching the surface and getting to know kind of their own personal learning fingerprint, so to speak. So that's important. And for parents, the key thing is to not worry if your child doesn't fall into any one specific category, or if they demonstrate characteristics of more than one learning style, because they're not fixed and they're not concrete and there is no specific formula for success. We don't want to, pigeonhole them into one style, but rather embrace the different, characteristics that they exhibit. And research also shows us that understanding how your child likes to learn and how they best process that information may help, improving their academic attainment overall. However, like I said, we need to do a little bit more research. Um, and sometimes the best way for us to learn, or the most effective way anyways, is based not on our individual preferences, but on the nature of the material that we're actually learning or being taught. So, for example, an example I was thinking of is like learning French. If you're looking at grammar, learning French grammar by pictures might not be the best way. But you know what? For some students, it may work better for them. Just like learning algebra purely verbally probably isn't the most effective way. And it might be really hard or impossible to even understand it without actually looking at, getting things down on paper. But we still have to consider these factors in our with our and looking at the student and the child as a whole. And then we go to our next slide. So how can you actually assess learning styles? So there's tons and tons of research. There's lots of articles and lots of online tools that you can use. Now I actually enjoy Brainbox. He's actually from the UK, and he has a really comprehensive website. And his questionnaire is really neat because it actually allows the students to see their scores for all three of the learning styles. A lot of them are very, straightforward questionnaires, and you just generate a result. Whereas the Brainbox one, it can be done on an iPad or on a phone. It's very touch screen friendly for students, and they can actually look at all the different scenarios, and they choose the one that they feel best suits them, or the one that they're like, hey, I like doing this the most. And then at the end, you can tally up and see how much did I score for auditory learning, how much did I score for kinesthetic, and so on. And it's neat because a lot of the times I ask students, I explain the different types of learning styles, and I say, what do you think? Like, what's your prediction? If you had to make up a hypothesis here about what what do you think your learning style is? A lot of the times they'll say something, and they'll be completely shocked to see that, hey, well, actually, when I'm thinking about doing work and homework and activities, um, I actually scored quite differently. So it's interesting. It's a good exercise to do. So there's the website, and obviously we'll have that available for you as well. So how can you best support your child as a student, as a client? Obviously, communication is so important. Checking in with your child and asking them, what are you finding difficult? What are you struggling with this activity? What is it about this that we can kind of adapt to make it more accessible for you? And obviously communicating, I kind of call it the trilogy of teacher, parent, and then often tutor, the parent, teacher, tutor trilogy, keeping everybody kind of abreast of any kind of, new and different things that we're discovering about a child and their kind of learning experience is really, really important. And obviously, if you're concerned, always speak with your teacher, if you have a tutor, an EA, etc., regarding the personalized learning style, because it's going to be very different for everybody. Obviously, make sure that the activities are developmentally appropriate. That's very, very important, because if they're not, then it's going to be even more difficult for them to access. And like we said, they're not permanently fixed, the learning style, so don't worry if your child doesn't fall into any one specific category or if they demonstrate characteristics of more than one. They're not permanently fixed, and as a student grows, matures, and develops both physically and intellectually, their preference of learning style may evolve. And reevaluating the learning style on an annual basis is also a good way to kind of check in with their development. And I often do this with clients who I see on an annual basis and moving up through the grades and kind of checking in just to see a little temperature check. Obviously knowing how your child likes to learn and how they best process information is an invaluable tool that we can use to help them do better. And it may also foster a lifelong love of learning, hopefully. We know that teachers and tutors do their best to accommodate the variety of learning styles in their classroom, but starting to think about the way that your child learns at home and using some strategies to aid them, can help lay the groundwork for a more confident, unique, and successful learner. So if you can, spend a few minutes this week with your budding scholar at home and, maybe talk about their learning styles and what they like the best. It's a great way to kind of check in. So again, I'd like to thank you for your time, and if anybody has any questions, I'll take them now. Otherwise, I will hand it over to Kathy if anybody has any questions. And obviously, I think most people have my email, so you could always email me later as well. Great. Thanks again, and I'll pass it back over to Kathy.
Great, thank you so much, Jill. I think the part, one of the pieces that I found most fascinating was when Jill mentioned the idea that our learning styles change over time. And that's something you just assume that you were born, you went to kindergarten, you started learning a certain way. But for me, that's interesting, and I guess we all grow and change. So again, I just wanted to thank Jill so much for her time and energy in putting together this great presentation for us. I put Jill's blog there in the chat box if you want to click on that and check it out. And just thanks everybody else for listening. The link to the recording will be made available on our website within about 7 days. Please join us next month when we talk about organization for the disorganized child, right in time for back to school. Have a wonderful evening.